remains. Now, we already know how you get dead people, why you get living people for examination. But for skeletal remains, let's say, when does those become a part or priority for us, and when are they brought as a skeletal remain for examination? So, let's say कि sometimes people, what they do is they examine. Am I okay? You can hear me, right? Because I'm still seeing no answers. I don't know why. You can hear me, just yell yes somewhere. Can you hear me now? Okay. Chalo. I'm really hoping. Still no. अरे यार. Okay. Thank you for that encouragement. Okay. So let's continue with our story. Let's say कि if a person commits a murder and he just buries the body, and after years and years that body is dug by the animals, or it is as a part, like everybody has seen Drishyam movie, right? If he has buried a body underneath the foundation of a police station, let's say that police station needs a renovation, and they start by deciding that okay, we'll make a parking lot in the basement, that body might come up as a skeleton. Okay. So these are the cases where, even in the mass disasters where nothing is left but the skeleton part. So these are the cases wherein they are brought as a skeleton to for you examination. Okay. So let's. I'm just building up the aura as to what it is. So there was a newspaper clipping of Times of India wherein there was a case which came into light after 8 years, and that was when a person was bludgeoned to death in Delhi, and when the culprits were caught after grilling and everything, he revealed such a fascinating story that what he did was he and his the person who was killed, his wife, and this person, they had an affair, and what they did was they killed the husband, and then they buried the body somewhere in Bhiwadi area, and they were following up the investigation, and when they got to know that crime branch has taken over the investigation, these two people, what they thought that it will be they might get caught, so what they did, they went to the place where they had buried the body, they dug out that body, then they found that it was already skeletonized, so what they did was they took the bones and they buried those bones in pieces, like in lots, like 7 to 8 at one place. They scattered the bones over a long stretch of the highway just to see to it that they are never caught. But unfortunately, they were caught, and they had to reveal the site where they had buried the bones. So that kind of cases do come eventually, like maybe in 8 years or something. But what another case that I have mentioned is what we did in our case, Mamsi. There was a case. This was also a unique case. A person, he files a report of his father missing, and after 10 days or so, another police station, they had caught 4 people for some other crime they had done. And when they were grilling them, they told that they had killed a person, they had strangled a person. That is by what they did was, what is strangulation? It's ligature strangulation is when you kill a person by pressing on his neck with a ligature material like a rope or something. So, so what they did, they strangled that person, they buried him by jungle. That's how they revealed that they have murdered a person 10 days back. And when they took the police to that very site, and that body was taken out, but all we could get was a few long bones and just the skull, and we had to find the whole story, what had happened. Okay. So under these circumstances, when the bones are brought to you, you receive them like it's a whole human being when it's alive and walking. But when they are reduced to bones, they might just end up in a box. So that's how we get the bones in a box, and we what we do is we arrange them. This is the case that I was talking about, our, wherein only few bones were found. As you can see, we were able to retrieve the skull and few femur part and the tibia part, and upper forearm bone was also recovered. So, and you can, if you can make out, you can see that these edges are torn off. Can you see? The ends are not there. It's like ragged margins. Will let you know how it happened. Okay. So the whole class will be based on very this topic, and we'll move as to how we deduce this, and we'll see what we found in the end. So, if you see these cases, you can see that there will be mud particles adhered to it, or you will see that tissues are there, a little bit of tissues or mud particles or leaves or everything. Whatever is extra is there other than the bones, you just clean them off and you preserve it for forensic science lab examination. If you see that the soft tissues are adhered, you have to see to it as and mark as to where they are. You have to note them, saying, okay, these are the bones where soft tissues are adhered. What is the condition of the bones? Is it wet or it is dry? Is it emitting foul smell? And these are the basic features that you have to note in the beginning itself. You have to, after arranging them anatomically, you have to take photographs, lots of photographs, because there might be minute details that you can see by enhancing those photographs, or by using a magnifying glass you can see so much through those bones. Once you have examined the bones externally about their condition, their soft tissues and all, now we can go and clean them off. Once For cleaning, we can either use a small soft brush, or you can even if soft tissues are adhered to it, you can just put them in क्या कहते हैं, pan or something, and you can boil them, and you can take out the bones. So obviously the adult bones, they you can have to keep for 12 hours or something, but for kids you can keep it for 6 hours, and you can take those bones out, and those will, and you can just scrape off lightly the soft tissues that are still adhered to it. And once, or even you can use the acids, you can use acetone to clean those, or sodium hydroxide. Now, we have already learned as to the objectives of the postmortem, right? When we have the whole body to examine. But with bones, just the bones, still we can find these 11 questions that we have to answer. And it's a whole long list, but let's start off. So first of the thing that you have to go through is whether it's a bone or not, because it's only the police's version. It's the police who says these are the bones that we have recovered. They have not done MBBS. They are not doctors. So they might be bringing some coral, or it might be just a wooden piece that they are thinking that it's a bone, but it may or may not be a bone. So if you know the structure, if you remember your anatomy, if you remember your osteology, you may be able to identify a bone just by looking at it grossly examination. Or if we take sections of it, let's be thorough, and we take a section of it, we know how does a bone look like from inside, right? So that is how we can do. Even the chemical composition, like the how much bone is made of inorganic elements, how much it is made of organic, and what is their ratio. It is different for every being. So let's say if it's a bone, it will be different. For if it's a stick, wooden stick, it will be different. So these are the things that you have to first identify whether it's a bone or not. Why to move further if you don't even know it's a bone or not? Okay. So, and moreover, when you have anatomically set them, then also you must have got that information ki, if it's a bone or not. Okay. Now that we know that it's a bone, we still have to find whether it's worth examining, because if it's a bone which is buried, we have to find whether it's a human bone or an animal bone. Okay. So most of the injuries that we have read, or most of the offenses that are there in our law, it's like even the word homicide or murder, we take it for humans only. So for you have to differentiate whether it's a human bone or it's an animal bone. There also your anatomy is gonna help you out. You will be able to differentiate between an animal bone and a human bone, Even if it's a whole skeleton, you can make out, okay, this is an animal, this is a dog, and this is a cat, or this is a human baby. So there was a case that was published wherein the police brought a skeleton of a monkey, baby monkey, and they said that it's that of a child which was recovered. But eventually, when we examined that, we were able to find out that it had matlab it was a you could make out from the skull that it was not of a human, but it was that of a monkey. So you have to differentiate whether it's a human bone or an animal bone. Even microscopy is going to help, because our bone system, we have the Haversian canal, and animals, they have some pleated form, they have some different texture when we do the microscopy. Even like I told you, chemical analysis can be done for even the ashes. Like if it's burned to ash and all that, still you can find whether it's an animal or a human bone. And what we can do is, kuch nahi mil raha hai, then we have the precipitin test. Micro mein you have already read, or you will be going to read, wherein we can differentiate the species based. We can differentiate the species based on the antigen antibody testing, which we call as precipitin test. Okay. Sorry guys, I'm not asking you questions because it's a long topic and I have to finish it. So, moving on, once you have identified that it's a human, then you have to identify whether you are dealing with one case or you have multiple bodies. Okay. Let's say if it's a mass grave, so you may be getting more than one skull. Or if it's like when you are putting them in an anatomical position, you will, when you see that, okay, there are two radii of the same side, or you find two femurs of the left side, and you say ki, okay, there is one radius which is left and which is right, but one is longer than the other, or one is that of a male, other is that of female. So whenever there is discrepancy among the bones, and there you realize, okay, we might be dealing with more than one dead body. So the third question that we go for is whether we are dealing with one set of bones or we are dealing with two set of bones. Finally, then we move on to major portions that we see. That is, we go in for further identification. Now that we know we are dealing with bones, and let's say we are dealing with one person's set of bones, the next thing that we need to know, and for other things to fall into place, first we have to differentiate the gender or the sex of the bone, that whether it belongs to a male or a female. Now these things, they can, let's say if you get a whole skeleton, you can identify quite a lot of features are there for general characteristics, just to say, okay, these bundle of bones belong to a male or these belong to a female. So when we are talking about male general characteristics, we say, okay, their body framework or their skeletal framework is pretty robust, and the muscular markings wherein the muscle attachments are there, they are pretty rough, and you can make out very easily. They are very much prominent. Whereas in females, they are more lighter, they are more subtle. Markings are not that prominent, and it's a fairly lighter skeleton. And even if you weigh them, it's pretty lighter for a female. If you get a whole skeleton, you put it on a weighing scale, it will be like 2.5 to 3 kgs, wherein two and a half around 3 kgs, and wherein that for males it will be around 4.5 kgs, depending upon the structure, obviously, how tall that person is and all that. But fairly, if we compare, we will see that the male bones are much heavier than that of the female. Now, individual bones, when we go for individual bones, we can differentiate by just looking at them, whether it's a male or a female. I'm really hoping that you remember your anatomy, and if not, we'll be revising that anatomy and we'll be seeing how uh, those specific differences that we see in a male or a female. One thing that you need to remember is, till a person sets in puberty, or well, till the child reaches the puberty, there are not much of changes in the skeletal system, and more or less they appear same, except for pelvis, which you can identify in the intrauterine life too. But other than that, most of the bones, they appear similar, and you are, it's very difficult to say whether it's bones belong to a male or a female. So we'll be going on with that. And if you get soft tissues adhered to it, and you still can get cells out of it, it might be easier because you will be able to identify the sex chromatin if you can get. So that is much easier to deduce whether it's a male or female, rather than going through the whole ordeal of examining each and every bone. Now, the major, you can say, the leading pioneer or leading person in the field of osteology and anthropology was Krogman. And he said that if you get an entire skeleton, just the skeleton, you can tell whether it's a male or female 100% with 100% accuracy. But as we go only with fewer bones like skull and pelvis, it reduces to 98. Pelvis alone itself has different, and skull for long bones it reduces to 80%. But if you have even the long bones in the pelvis, it goes till 98%. So, looking at these things, you will be able to differentiate whether it's a male or a female. Okay. Then I know it's too much to see, but I just wanted to display it because this is the difference between that you get. We do give you skull in your spotting exercise. Even in exams, you do get the questionnaire where you have to write differences between two things. And skull, pelvis, mandible, sacrum, these are the commonest ones that you are asked. So it's just to display that it's there in the books. You can read from the books. I'm not going to read it. I know it's there and you can read that. But let's go with subtle changes that you have to look when you are dealing with a practical examination of a bone. So if you can compare, this is that of a male and this is that of a female. When you look at the forehead, you can see that it's a sloping forehead. It's a more or less, you can say it's receding kind of thing. Whereas in females, it's bossing. If guys can just put your hand over your forehead, you can make out that it just goes back. And whereas in females, it's vertical because it's bossing. So if it's bossing, that means that the frontal eminence and the parietal eminence. Just remember, in skull, the two eminences, that is the frontal and the parietal, they are very much prominent in females, and the every other thing is very much prominent in males. Okay, so it's only the frontal and the parietal eminence which is prominent in females. And when you move a little bit down, you can see the glabella. What is glabella? It's the one which is there in between the two eyebrows. If you can palpate, you can see that you can make out in males that okay, this is you can feel the bulge, whereas in female it's pretty smooth. And when you see at the frontonasal angle, you can make out that there is you can see there is an angle, whereas in it just falls smoothly. Then the eyes socket and all, I'll show you in the next slide. If you look at the occiput region, like I said, everything is prominent in males and it's very much subtle in females. Zygomatic arch, we do say that females have a prominent cheeks, but unfortunately, when we go on to the bones, the males, they have a prominent zygomatic arch and it is placed laterally, whereas in females, it's not. Okay. Then let me show you the picture wherein if you see the eye sockets in the female, it is seen that it's round, but the margins are pretty sharp, whereas in that in males, it is square and the margins are smoother. And they are set very, in males, they are set lower on a face, whereas in females, they are set higher. Okay, these are the things that I just discussed about the forehead. You can see this arrow. It's the forehead is kind of receding, whereas in this thing, it's pretty much straighter. This is the supraorbital margin, the one where your eyebrows lie. These are very much prominent in males and it's not so in females. And this is the angulation that you can see. These are the real bones that might be displayed when you are going through the spotting exercise. Now, when we look at the back, the mastoid process, you can see from 1 to 5 and one for each and every variation. It's just to show you that you cannot just take a bone and say, okay, this is male and this is female, because there are whole range of changes that occur, and that's why we use the term oid in the end. It can be android, it can be gynecoid, that is more towards female or more towards male. That's all we can say. So if you look at this nuclear crust on the first, this is what is seen in a female, whereas in for males it's very much prominent. You can see that nook there. It is coming out. This is a nuchal crust in males. Similarly, in mastoid process, if we see, it's not so much prominent. It's not protruding out in females, whereas this is what we see in males, wherein it has come way below the meatus, and you can see that as a prominent mastoid process. So these are the ones which you can see in typical male, and these are the ones which you can see in typical female. Now, coming on to the mandible. The main thing you have to remember is that this angle. Okay. Whenever the same thing goes for every other bone, like it has muscular markings are prominent and everything, it goes for every other bone. But in here, you can see that it's less obtuse in males and it is more obtuse. That's why the female angle, when you draw female face, you draw from the chin, it goes at the back because it's more obtuse. And when you look at the chin, if you can just outline the chin, you will see that the chin is square in males, whereas in females it's rounded. Okay. Another thing that you have to remember is this height. This is symphyseal menti height. This is more in males and this is less in females. Even the height, even the width of the ramus, it's more in males and it's less in females. Okay, this is there in the box just to show you. Okay. Now, can you guys tell me as to what, just at the look of one, is it a male or a female skull? Let's see how much did you understand. Is it a male or is it a female? Is it a male or a female? Female. Justify. Because that's the question that is asked every other time you have to do that. Even when you are explaining it's a male or a female, you have to justify both the things. Actually, anybody else? Male or female? Okay. I can't have patience right now because I'm running short of time, but that's a male skull. Because if you can make out, it's basically receding. If the nose is very much, you can see that angle, you can make out that angle. Anyways, you learn it more when you see a skull, and then we'll be coming for the class. Next is the pelvis. That's the second bone that we have to be very thorough about, and is the one which gives us a lot of information. So if you get the whole pelvis, like its joint pelvis and ligaments are still intact, this is how it looks like. I'm really hoping that you remember your anatomy. In males, it's heart shaped because it comes like the promontory is the sacral promontory is much prominent in males, so it comes like a heart shape, whereas it's a bowl shape in females. And the main thing that you have to remember is like there is a whole big table out of it. But if you remember, because females, they have a pelvis to accommodate for future pregnancies, so they are by and large they are very much roomy. So if you look at the inlet, pelvic inlet, it's flat bowl shape, whereas in males it's kind of a funnel. Like the inlet is comparatively bigger, where it narrows down when it comes to the outlet. So it's a funnel shape, and if the main thing that you have to see is the subpubic angle, it's like it's acute, whereas in females it's obtuse. It's just like for males, we can say it's the angle if you outstretch your index finger and the middle finger, the angle that forms between both on outstretching is what you see as a subpubic angle in males. Whereas if you see the thumb, the angle between the thumb and the index finger, which is pretty much stretched on stretch, it looks like obtuse. So that's how it is. Okay. Main things that you have to remember is greater sciatic notch. If you are asked in PG entrance, which is one feature that you want to look for when you're examining a pelvic bone, this is an innominate bone. If you remember the name, it's an innominate bone on one side. So greater sciatic notch, it is shallower in females and it's broader in females. So it's broad and it's shallow, whereas in males, it's pretty much deeper. And the ischial tuberosity, because I told you it has to be a roomy pelvis, it is more, everything is moved a little bit on the outer side, or they are wide apart in females, whereas in males it's pretty much closer. And if you can see this, this is that of a male, wherein the obturator foramen is ovoid or oval shape, and you can see that this sciatic notch is pretty much deeper. Okay. Now coming on, these are the features that you can read from the book. It's there, everything is there. Another thing that you can see is the preauricular circles. It is something which is there only in females because of the ligament, sacroiliac ligament, which is very much important in females because it helps to retain. It is very helpful during the childbirth. So it is there only in females. Now the another part is that of the sacrum. Sacrum bone also we keep for spotting. If you can see overall, male sacrum is longer and narrower, whereas that of the female is pretty much wider and more or less square shaped. So the main thing is that this base, the base of the first sacral vertebra, and that of the body of the first sacral vertebra, this is way bigger than the. This is bigger than that. This ella. This is known as the ella of the sacrum. This is bigger and this is smaller. And the if you look at the angulation, you can see that arrow. You can see that in males it's uniformly curved, whereas in females, till the third sacral segment, it comes as a vertical down, and then it moves uh, this thing interiorly. This is the shape for helping out with the childbirth. Last bone that we have to read in detail is that of femur. Main thing that you have to remember in femur is the head. It's if you look at the head of the head of the femur is the whole globe or sphere. You can say it's more than two-thirds of a sphere if you are dealing with a male bone, and it's less than two-thirds of a sphere if you are dealing with a female femur bone. The next thing is obviously the length is more in males than in females. Even the this bicondylar width is more in males than in females. Another thing that you have to remember is the neck shaft angle. Neck shaft angle, it's less obtuse. It's less obtuse in males and more obtuse in females because of the placement that is there. In males, it is laterally placed, whereas in females, it's anterolaterally placed. So other bones that you can read from the book, sternum, tibia, ribs, these are all sexually dimorphic bones. So you can read about them. Not much is there, but yeah, few points. If in ask, you should be knowing those. These are the indices. Now, whatever we read, it was all subjective. But these indices, when we measure certain segments of the bone and we compare or we take a ratio with the other parts. These are the indices that we see, and we can say, okay, whether these are male or these females. So these are more of objective type, and these can help to determine the sex of the particular bone. Now, before I move further, all I want to say is it's just not one bone that you have to talk about. You have to talk about all the bones. So when you're looking at all the bones, the answer should be collective. It's not that, okay, this is male and this is female. You cannot just say, okay, one bone has three features of male and other has three features of female. It can be, you can have everything, but it has to be a collective answer that you have to find whether those bones belong to a male or a female. Regarding the age of the bones, like if a person, what was the age of the person when he was killed or when he died? So these are the, you have to look for the age changes. These we will be dealing with in details. We have already gone through dental thing yesterday evening. Rest of the things we will be discussing in further classes. Race is something that we have not much of a problem, but let's say if you find a body on a highway or you find a dead body in mountains where people go for trekking, so they might be of different origins. That person might be a European or accent, or he can be a Mongolian race, or can be from sub-Saharan, sub-African area. So there you have to identify whether those bones belong to some other person rather than in that of Indian origin. So you can see overall changes. If you can see the face, you can see out the negroid features. They have a prognostic jaw. That is prognathnism, you can say, but there the features are pretty much flat in Mongoloids. These are the of Chinese and Mongolian region. These are Europeans, and these I told you of African descent. Okay. So main thing that you have to remember for racial difference is the cephalic index or the cephalic index. It is like if you have a skull, you have to measure the maximum transverse breadth, wherein you take a vernier caliper, you fix it on the both parietal eminences, and you get the transverse breadth. And then you move that caliper and you put one end at the glabella and the other end at the occipital prominence, and you take the anteroposterior length. When you take a ratio of that, you will see that the skull can be differentiated into whether it's a long headed, wherein obviously the length is more, and the other end is the brachycephalic, where it is smaller, wherein the breadth is more and the length is less. So these are the races that we differentiate on the basis of the cephalic index. Okay, these are the indices that are also used. Like I told you, we have certain subjective features, we have certain objective features. These are the objective features that can be used to determine the race and more precisely the ethnicity of the bones that you have found. Now, stature is something we can even find how tall that person was just by looking at a bone. So, if you get a whole skeleton, you can simply measure from top to bottom and you can say, okay, this is the stature length. And you can just add soft tissue length like 2.5 to 4 centimeters to it and say, okay, was the height of the person that police should be looking for. But let's say if you don't get the whole skeleton, you get certain bones. So people have worked on that, and they can, because your body proportion is somewhat constant. So you can easily you can deduce if you get just a forearm bone, if you just get a femur, you can say how tall that person was when he was alive. So you have certain formulas that can be used, wherein if you just measure the length of the bone, you can add a fixed fact, you can multiply it with a multiplication factor which is specific for each and every bone, and you can add fixed factor which is again specific for that very bone, and you can find the stature. Pretty much formulas are there, and you can, these are mostly for European people, but for Indians, we do have certain formulas for certain areas, because in India also we have huge variety. So even people who are in North India or Northwest India, they are more like Caucasians. So their height and structure, they look different. Their height is different. Whereas in the features that we see towards eastern part, those are more or less Mongoloid features. Similarly, even the stature is different for different states people. So they have given formulas, and all they were very nice people. So they just found, okay, you measure the length and you multiply it by this. Now you can see this structure. This is the osteometric board. You just place the bone between two things. You can slide this as closer you can, and you just measure. This is a scale, and you can measure the length of the bone, and then you multiply it with a factor for that particular state, for that particular bone, and you get the length or the structure. Now, what else we can deduce from the bones? If you, let's say you found certain fractures, old fractures, and you have a missing persons list, wherein when the relatives, they have told that, okay, this my so and so person is missing, and he had a fracture when he was 8 years old. He had a femur fracture, and we had to put plate for that construction, for that bone reconstruction. So there, if you find those deformities, even if because of some occupation, like if a person is into certain occupations where there are bony changes because of that occupation, you can still narrow down the possibilities as to who that person might be. Even the x-rays, let's say if you have had your dental x-rays done for some root canal therapy or something, there you can see that because of that, and if you find a whole skull wherein bones are intact, you can compare those antemortem x-rays with those post-mortem x-rays where there are certain differences in the dentition, like if as a person has a crooked teeth, or a teeth is malaligned, and you can compare that malaligned tooth with the postmortem and antemortem x-rays, and you can find it. Now, something interesting that you'll be learning about in detail will be superimposition. If you get a skull, you can add clay to it, because you know how thickness works, and you can reconstruct the whole face just by looking at the by having a skull in your hand, and you can take out a whole, you can make the whole face out of that skull, and that can be used for further identification. Now, coming on to the injuries, let's say if we have to still find that whether those bones are found lying there, or whether those bones are because somebody murdered and then chopped off the body and then disposed of the body. So when you look at those things, if the ends of the bones they are very much smoother, that it's generally more of natural uh, disintegration of the body. But if that has been hacked, the bones are chopped off, so you can see those cut ends. You can say, okay, this person was murdered and then chopped off and then disposed. Even the bones, if they are burnt with flesh and without flesh, they appear different. When it's with flesh, because of the flesh, those bones they appear a little bit grayish and everything. Even you can find whether the bones were burnt in open or in, if it's whitish in color, they are pretty much open because soot doesn't deposit, it just goes off. Whereas if it's a confined space, you have burnt the body, it will be grayish because the soot keeps on depositing on those bones. Finally, time since death, there you have already read most of it in postmortem changes as to when we can say the skeletonization has occurred. But that too depends upon the type of soil, whether it's buried or not, or whether scavenging activities has not. If you remember, I just showed you the picture. The ants were eaten off by the fox, by the dog, wild dog, or even rats. They just eat off the flesh and they just fill their tummies. Okay. Uh, Cause of death, can we reduce just by looking at bones? Yes. If the person has been, if the bones are fractured, or if the person was shot in the head, you can see the bullet markings. Like in this very case, you can see if you reconstruct the skull, we can see there is a bullet hole. And if this person was bludgeoned to death and even hacked by this heavy, sharp weapon, and you can see that this is the cut that made. So once that is you have examined, you make the postmortem report, you preserve the bones again, you reseal it like the ones you got in a box. You again reseal it and you send it for FSL examination. If you get a head, you reconstruct the head and you send it for superimposition. Like I told you, you can find you can get a face out of that skull bone. Even for teeth, if you get a teeth, you can send it for DNA extraction and cross examination if somebody comes forward saying, okay, this is my relative. Now, for winding up, last thing, like the case that I was talking about, this is what we found in our case. When we reconstructed, we were able to make out that this was an entry wound, and the case that they said strangulation, they were lying. This was the entry wound that you can see the black arrows, and the white arrow that you can see the end. This was the exit wound. So when a bullet entered from here, it made this curvy end, and when it left, it made this end. So this is the entry and this is the exit wound of the very particular case that we did here. So ultimately, what we gave the opinion that the person, because we were able to see teeth, so it was an adult male, more than 25 years of age, because we were able to see the dentition. And then, according to cause of death, we were able to give that there was an entry wound and an exit wound on the skull. So person was shot to death. He was made to lean down. He was made to bend on his knees. He was shot like a execution style. He was shot on his head, wherein the bullet went from the top and it came out from the bottom. And the thing that they revealed in the story was they even shot him in the abdomen. Now we didn't get any soft tissue, so maybe it didn't hit the vertebra, or we didn't even get the vertebra. So we were not able to substantiate that thing, but we were able to at least tell, okay, he, even if that abdominal wound wouldn't have been there, he would have died because of gunshot to the head. So you can find so much out of those bones, and so much is to study about those bones. So I really hope that I was able to finish off everything in a fast forward mode the time I had. If you guys have any questions, please you can email it to